You're watching the Two Guys Talking Podcast Network.
We've all got incredibly active interests when it comes to podcasting. But what about editing? Well, guys, if editing your podcast takes a long time, you're doing it wrong. Or are you? We're going to find out during this session of the Podcast Gauntlet, where we throw down, discuss, rise, and shine in podcasting. Greetings, everybody. I'm Mike Wilkerson, one of your hosts.
And I'm Brian Ensminger, the other one of your hosts.
Man, this is a great one because there are so many opinions and thoughts and absolutes when it comes to podcast editing and the time that you're going to spend doing it from every single side of every single aisle on planet Earth. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's one of those things, especially, so there's, like you said, there's multiple thoughts, but especially when somebody is new and getting started, or if they're contracting with an editor and now they're starting to think, well, should it really take that long? Like there's a lot of thoughts around how long should it take to edit my episode? And of course, the answer is 10 minutes, right? Right, Mike? 10 minutes? Everything start to finish?
Especially for a 45-minute podcast. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's actually not accurate. Again, what this all comes down to is the expectation or the rumor mill versus what is reality. And what I hope to do inside of this episode of the Podcast Gauntlet is to give everybody in just about every perspective of aisle some dose of reality when it comes to podcast editing. I can remember vividly when we started editing the 24podcast.com effort way back when. This is now 20 years ago, guys. When we were editing that program, it felt like forever. The difference, of course, was we had to get it done. We would watch the program on Monday. We'd capture the program either on Monday evening or Tuesday evening. And then by Thursday evening, we had to have the program done and out to the audience so that they'd have it for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to listen and interact with it. But then also so we could get back to the next episode that was on Monday. That's one of the very few reasons that I am a giant proponent of doing things weekly, because you don't really have an option. In the case of a television program, if you get maybe 2 episodes behind, you're really starting to dance with the devil when it comes to people being able to not only continue their attention span, but especially back then, continue their attention span because they're on your ass like, hey man, where's the episode? There were several times where either Brian or Tony or Chris or myself, we just had other commitments. And so we couldn't finish the episode in time for the next one. It only happened maybe 2 or 3 times across the entire span of those seasons, but it did happen. And when instantly we did it, we got instant reprisal from the audience that was not good. And,
yeah, for sure.
Especially what we always tried to tame it with was we never said anything to the account of, well, hey guys, doing this free shit for you takes a long time and you're just going to have to shut up and bear it. We never said that, but it is kind of the feeling where when we're capturing a podcast that for a 43-minute program usually took about 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours every single episode. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of podcast content to edit. And to even just get that done before Thursday, we always try to get it done by Thursday early evening, so 6 p.m. Central. That was a Herculean effort because of what we had decided to format inside of the 24 podcast. And guys, remember, the 24 podcast is not your average podcast. It's not hitting the record button, a couple of guys yapping to microphones, and you hit the stop button, and then you publish the shit. That's not what was going on with the 24 podcast. In fact, it's never been that way with the 24 podcast because there's expectations from the host and I to be able to generate that program so that there is this otherworldly, simply can't get it somewhere else quality to it. That's the whole point of making things on the internet is you want it to be engaging, compelling, and unlike anything else you can get somewhere else. And so to do that, it would take lots and lots of time to do it. That trend continues with even the most rudimentary podcasts now. Because while you may have now figured it out to where you can sit down and, like Brian and I do, hit the recording button and then hit the stop button when we're done. And then, by the way, there now is a publish button inside the tool that we're using. We both know that, especially because our businesses are podcast editing centric, well, we want to edit the shit, right? Yeah. And so there's our reason for it needing to take whatever time it's going to take. And based on Brian and my skill sets, we take as much time as we need to make a good, solid product with as much time as we have in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah.
And those, as long as you remember those three things, those are the tenets that will guide you inside of podcast editing. But there is not one quick solution or answer to the concept of, my God, it takes me, or how much time should it take me to edit my podcast? The answer is not the same for every program. The answer is not, oh, it doesn't take any time at all. Or, yeah, I listen at 5 times speed to edit my podcast. You don't. You don't edit listening at 5 times speed. In fact, I think people that edit at 2 times speed are likely missing some reasonably relevant things. Two times listening is not trivial, especially if you're listening to someone like myself, or Brian's probably in the middle of the cadence when it comes to speaking. But if you start adding that on vocabulary and the spills between a variety of guests inside of a program, listening faster does not just simply mean you're going to get the program done faster. It means you're likely going to make mistakes faster as well.
Yeah. And I think the one message I would like to share is editing takes as long as editing takes. And it's a combination of your skill or the host's skill, or the host and the guest, or whatever that combination is, as well as a host, as an editor, the software that you're using and how easy that is, the scope of work that you're doing. And honestly, it can vary pretty widely. And I saw a post on, I think, Facebook yesterday or today, where somebody was talking about how their client wanted a 1-hour video episode edited and ready to go in 2 to 2.5 hours. So they stop recording. It's 45 minutes to an hour. They want this thing edited and ready to go. But that also includes the full edit, the audio version, which is, I think, the same edit, listening through for show notes, timestamps, clips, shareable social media assets, all of that stuff. They wanted everything turned around in 2 hours. And my answer was, that's impossible. You don't get
impossible.
You don't get a deep edit of a 1-hour video episode in 2 hours. You don't get high quality show notes. So you can talk about the scope of work. Do they want less work done? Do they want to put more people on the project, which is probably still not possible? Do they want to outsource some of it to AI and just go with the results they get? Just hit a button and take the clips you get. So there are ways that you can address that. But the reality is, even just a straight through video edit, unless you're just going to do top and tail and nothing else, that's going to take a lot longer. But for those of you that are watching, you're going, well, how long should it take? It can vary widely. I have one client that I work with where the 20-minute episode recently took an hour and a half. That's about right. But I've had some where the guest isn't very well spoken, and so it takes 3 hours to do a 20 to 30-minute episode. That's way longer than it should have taken, but that's because the quality of the work that I'm doing is commensurate with what I charge, and so I'm able to take that time. Conversely, I have another client that I work with where I've got a show that goes out on terrestrial radio. And so it comes through already having been run through Descript with a line edit that's made by a really high quality producer. And then most of my job is fixing bad edits. And that can take anywhere from 2 to 3 hours all the way up recently to 6 hours to finish that one episode. Now, this is not a complaint. I get paid for my time, so I'm happy to do it. But the reality is, part of that is the episodes I was working on, and part of it is because they changed software. I'm not as good as that software, but it's also not as good as fast as the software I was using before. So it all works together. And the fact is, if it takes a long time, you could be doing it wrong. You might need to adjust the scope of work that you're trying to do, or you might just realize this is how long it takes to put out the kind of quality that I want to do. And especially if you're a professional editor, that all goes down to what clients are you targeting, and are you charging appropriately for the kind of work? I'm not talking about milking clients. I'm talking about, can you give them the quality of work and still have a little bit of margin to feed your family and do it and get it done? Because it takes time to do a high quality edit. And I'm sorry, guys, AI is not there yet. It may never be there, but it's not there yet.
Yeah, and it's not going to get there. There's only been one client that's left me for AI, and it's simply because it was an easier option that they found at the same time that they were hunting for programs. And so the problem is that they're not going to have anything to compare it to. They're just going to have what was the AI available solution first, versus having a real person doing it with the ability to listen to what they want, as opposed to hopefully interpreting a prompt appropriately and then pooping out whatever it is that they're expecting. That's a guess, not a tell, but again, just from watching the stream of consciousness of what happens, especially inside of podcast editing, I think that's what you're going to see, is that it can do and help with many different tasks. But can it take your raw audio stream and instantly poop out a finished program with your top, your bottom, your mids, your advertisements in between, your live reads, wherever you designate? No. And I don't think that it will. There will always be someone that's got to at least proctor the thing, or that has to go back and then review the thing before you send it off to get your paycheck. It's just the way that it works. There were a couple of things that also came up while you were speaking that I want to make sure we also address. The first one is, I don't care. Anytime you're speaking to a customer of, at least in my opinion, any level, even if it's where you're new and gosh, you're scraping the bottom of the barrels for work because you've got to get some provenance, you've got to get some experience. Remember that when you're speaking to people, that you'll say something to the effect of, well, the edit will probably take me at least 2 hours if your program is an hour. But just know that it may take longer. And if you hear the words at any point, whether it's the short end or the long end, I don't care. I tell you to run valiantly from wherever the hell you're at and go find another potential customer. And it's not because you can now potentially get in and get on the really great side of a deal, which you potentially could. Absolutely. If it takes you an hour and 15 minutes to get a job done, and you're being paid for 3 hours. Hey, score for you, right? That's awesome. The problem is that you have to remember that Brian, it's what solicited this comment from me. Brian hit it squarely on the head, where very often podcasting is with a series of different guests. You'll have the host, and hopefully, but not all the time by any stretch of any kind, will the host always have their A game in regard to actually speaking. I think Brian and I have now done the Podcast Gauntlet enough that Brian and I know both of our picadillos. And so if we have to edit the program, we're able to edit the program. But more importantly, when we lay down the program, we've got it down to a chemistry set where I can feel his ebb and flows inside of the discussion. I know when to pick up. Brian knows when to pick up. We know what kind of distance we want from the start of the podcast to the end of the podcast. And so that ebb and flow and putting on the front ends and the back ends, usually it'll take a good solid squared box of time, because we know how to speak, because we take the time to try and improve our filler crutch bullshit that we do inside of the programs. We actively do that. And so you have less time to work inside of the window, which means if you're working for a client, that means that the profit that you're making on the episode goes up. And that's awesome. The problem is the other side of that coin, where if the host doesn't have their A game on every single episode, which they don't. No. Even someone that's been podcasting as long as Brian and I, there are episodes where, sunspot, man, something went wrong. Something's just not working. And so you've got that. But then you've also got where if you are having on guests, people that you've never talked to before, except maybe in a phone call or a brief video chat or something else, when you get them engaged in long form content discussion, all bets are off on how they actually speak. Yeah. All bets. Every single bet. Every bet you've ever even contemplated all goes completely out the window. And so remember, your guesstimate of it's going to take me approximately 2.5 hours to do your 45-minute podcast. And you're going to hear the obligatory, it's going to take how long to do that podcast? It's only an hour and 15 minutes. Well, that's giving you a little bit of wiggle room, but then it's also just being reasonable. Again, if we go back to the concept of how fast are you listening to the podcast, I like to actively listen to my podcast while I'm editing, and I teach all of the editors that I train to listen at one speed. That's not because I want you to waste time. It's because I want you to actually hear what they're saying. There can't be a time where we're getting 4 and 5 projects back where they're like, hey, I'm just wondering, did you guys go to sleep while you were editing, or what the hell is this? There can't be that. And there certainly can't be that in an ongoing capacity because you decided that 2.5 times listening was awesome that afternoon. You can't do that, or rather you can do that. But remember, if you do choose to do that, you have to pay for that. And usually what that means is a lost customer, because of the things you can screw up as a podcast editor. What you can't screw up as a podcast editor is the podcast editing. It's amazing how many people forget about those things.
It's interesting that you bring up the 2X, because I used to be a 2X editor, and I'm not convinced that I missed stuff, But one of the things that I found was that when I started editing at 1x, I started making the dialogue breathe a little bit more. I didn't cut it as tight. I allowed a little bit more time for people to think, which is not something I was doing when I was editing 2x. I should probably also mention for people that are wondering, like, how long does it take to do this show? This is approximately a 20 to 30 minute episode that we do typically. And for me, editing the show, setting up the multicam, doing the multicam edit, then doing the audio edit, and then creating the 2 social media clips or the reels that we create out of this is probably 3 hours per episode. And then Mike does all the show notes. So if you start thinking about doing an hour-long episode, obviously you don't have to edit in the same style that I do, but think about that could be 5 to 6 hours to do a good, high-quality video edit. Now, you could, of course, just do top and tail and fix the audio and go with it and leave all the ums in. But that's not the editing that we do. And so if you're thinking about, well, I want to do a video podcast and now I want a separate audio version as well, we can talk about workflow if you want me to help you work on the workflow, but it's going to take time because we're talking like 5 to 6 times the amount of audio time to do the edit and those couple of clips. Not a complaint. That's just the reality that you might be looking at if you want to do this. Are there ways to go faster? Are there ways you could use AI? Possibly, but I've not found an AI edit yet that I've been happy with, and I find that I spend more time fixing them typically than I would if I just did it myself.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. The other thing that I always tell people is, regardless of the tool, what kind of offerings do they have when it comes to changing out the edit that the AI/automated system does?
Yeah.
Because if that feels like working with a potato, then it's shit. It has to be something that helps you. It shouldn't be something that dissuades you, so you just kind of go, I guess I'll just use what it gave me. That's not a tool. That is an off-ramp to doing something easier. And guys, I'm not telling you that everything that is easier is shit, but I am telling you that very often you have to put in the work.
Yeah.
Guys, it's just work. And your dreams of avarice that include trying to get over on 7 clients where you're only working for 6 hours across what should be a 20-hour workload, you are kidding yourself when it comes to editing. It does not work that way. At least it doesn't. It's never worked for me effectively, especially with legitimate clients that realize that you are doing a job that not only have they probably tried and failed terribly at, but that you could just do it better because of how much experience, how much in the way of either equipment or tools or plugins or your doodads that you've gotten to help you edit, you've actually engaged in. All that stuff compiles into this ball of energy and time that you then have to throw at the job that usually the client simply doesn't have. And so remember, if you start getting people that are pounding you about, well, wait a minute, why is it going to cost so much? Guys, you have to remember that the ball of energy and time and profit that you're making has to be a time of ball and energy and profit that you're actually making something on. Otherwise, you are eating your tail. You don't want to eat your tail inside of podcast editing. The last thing I wanted to, go ahead.
I was going to say, you don't want to forget that, especially if you're a professional editor, you exist within a marketplace. And while you might be able to make significantly more profit than other people for a while, in the end, the marketplace will normalize. And if you're taking shortcuts, either other people will find those shortcuts and be able to take advantage of them, or you'll get found out. And the quality of your work will suffer, whatever happens. And so just remember, you don't have to price yourself based on everybody else, but you do work in a marketplace where people don't want to pay more than the value that they receive. They want to receive at least the amount of value that they paid for, if not more. And your job is to make what's valuable to them worth what they're paying for you and make sure that that's valuable enough to cover what you're doing to give it to them. There's
actually 2 last things. The first thing is,
sorry.
No, that's okay. I love concepts like this inside of our program, Brian, because it fuels the passionate parts of everything that you and I do inside of this industry. I can remember specifically interacting inside of many of the forums, in particular Facebook, where there would be 4 or 5 different comments about talking about costs. And inevitably, someone will just say, just go to Fiverr. And that always drive me insane because, again, as a legitimate podcast editing entity outlet, whether it's my skill sets or the skill sets of those over at editorcore.com, the bottom line is that I know it takes more than even just $5 or $25 that you would find via somebody at, say, like a Fiverr that will say, I'll edit your podcast for $25. You, sir, are an idiot. You not only are you taking down everything inside of the podcast editing industry, you're taking down podcasting because you're offering up an availability where someone legitimate that is looking for a podcast editor is going to go and use you because you're cheap. They're going to go, wait a minute. That other dude wanted $350 for a podcast episode. This guy will do it for $25. Geez, even if he says 100, we still got that much more. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to something like a Fiverr or an Upwork or something where there's a discounted availability where clearly not only is it not being done by someone who is an English first speaker, it's taking out the industry of podcasting and podcast editing out at the knees because there is no way that reasonable expectations could ever be reinserted inside of that chemistry set without some sort of upheaval. There's no way. The last thing I wanted to talk about too was essentially the business triangle. For those of you that have forgotten what the business triangle is, it's a triangle that has 3 sides. The sides are cost, speed, and quality. And you, sir or madam, get to pick 2 of them. And no joke, if you remember that as a podcast editor, that's how any legitimate business realizes how podcasting works, everything will be pretty smooth. The problem, of course, is that your ears start to perk up anytime anybody says, I've got a podcast and I've been looking for somebody to edit it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Guys, we all get it. The hair on the back of your ear starts to prick up and you're like, very interesting. Okay. And you can start to feel the drool coming down the corner of your mouth. Interesting. Really. I'm a podcast editor and now the bets are all off, right?
Yeah.
So you have to remember those fundamentals are going to, not only will they help you, they will severely cost you if you do not entail them and roll them into what you're doing, not only as a podcast editor, but also as a podcaster. It may be that this episode gets way more in the way of podcast editors looking at it, but I hope, and actually that's a great call to the audience, if you are a podcaster and you have found this video and you've gotten this far along inside of it and you found some value, I would very much like for you to use the comments section here inside of the video presentation, but then also over at our website, over at podcastgauntlet.com, click on the contact button, fill out the quick web form, and tell us what you're thinking in regard to podcast editing, but also the value that's associated with podcast editing. Because guys, regardless of whether you're a podcaster or you're a podcast editor or anybody in between, you have to remember the faster you kick the legs out from underneath podcast editing value or podcasting value, everybody in the industry fails. And again, we're looking forward to hearing from you. And we have many more episodes in regard to podcast editing inside of the Podcast Gauntlet. Again, it's where Brian and I live and breathe inside of the podcasting industry. Look for the links inside the description here, but then also at the show notes over at podcastgauntlet.com. Until next time, I'm Mike Wilkerson, one of your hosts.
And I'm Brian. My quote was my bottom dollar in Sminger, and I'm the other one of your hosts.
Thanks for watching and listening. We'll see you next time. There are many tasks involved inside of podcast. Really?
It switched interfaces on me. What a mess.